Jungle.
Hi, my name is Victor Kere, and first of all, welcome back to my channel. And I'd like to thank you guys for the engagement that I got on my previous video. It was very encouraging, and I want to keep on going. Alright, so for today, we're going to talk about the process of building in Kenya. It's a process that many people aspire to, but they really don't know where to start from. So for our discussion today, we're going to assume that you already have land. This is me trusting that you've done the due diligence in searching for the land, that all your documents are in order. We'll talk about the process of buying land in another video, just to make sure that everybody understands what it takes to own land, so that you're not scammed all around. Yeah. So the first thing that you need, first of all, in terms of documentation, is your title deed. Make sure the title deed is in your name. Make sure your land rates are paid, and also maybe have a mutation plan. But as long as the land is in your name and you show it's in your name, your professionals that are coming up are going to help you in sourcing some of these documents. So where do you start? The first point of contact is an architect. An architect is a professional in the built industry who really conceptualizes the designs. Because at the end of the day, a house is not just a structure. You need it to look a certain way. You need it to meet your needs. So an architect is that person who ideally takes a brief from you and exactly what you want, what your needs are, and they can advise you on how the best way of doing it. So the first day you meet an architect, first of all, where do you get an architect? You can get them from referrals, of course, from people you've seen do good work, or you can look them up maybe online. But to make sure you're working with a professional, check the Board of Registration of Architects and Quantity Surveyors, BORAQS. BORAQS has a list of architects and quantity surveyors, and if an architect is not on that list, they're probably not in good standing, or they're not an architect. So make sure your architect is on that list. If they're on that list, well, the first time you meet them, it is expected that the architect will take a brief of your needs. For example, let's say you want to do your residential house. How many bedrooms is it? How big a piece of land do you want? What style of architecture do you want? What facilities need to come with it? He'll advise you all on that. So once you've met the architect on the first day, you can gauge whether the architect can meet your needs. And once you see that they can meet your needs and you have done your due diligence with the registration, the next step will be for you to avail yourself to visit the site with the architect. It's very important for the architect to go and see the land, because it allows them to get a feeling of what is around the land, beyond the neighboring plots, and also having a sense of the type of developments that are happening there. It's important for them to see that. And the architect will also carry out some site analysis. For example, they can check out, for example, where does the sun rise from, and that might give them direction on how to set the house. What soil does the land have? Is there a slope on land? Is there a slope on the land? Yeah. Is there vegetation on the land that may need to be preserved? And also, it's also important for you to also ascertain where your beacons are, so that you don't end up building on other people's land. A lot of cases have happened where people have encroached maybe by a foot into someone else's land, and then you're caught up in cases for so many years. So it's just part of due diligence, but your architect will advise you on that. So that is generally the inception stage. You've told the architect what they want, what you want. The architect has seen your land, and then now the architect will go and sit down and come up with some plans, some general plans that give you like a program of how things will flow. For example, if you're doing a residential house, where's the kitchen? Where's the sitting room? Where do you want a library? Where's the bedroom? How many toilets do you want? What is the compound like? Where do you park? So essentially, it's just showing you a layout of how things are arranged. With that, you can judge the areas of the rooms. With that, but at this point, you don't still have the outlook of the building. You just have something that allows you to imagine how the house flows. So at that point, your architect will come back with that plan, and you'll have a discussion on that, and you'll make the changes that you want to that plan. And at this point now, then the architect will go back to the next stage. And I need to remind you that all this work at this point is paid, depending on how you agree with your architect. But the next stage, you can call it like the preliminary design. So at this point, the architect will make reviews on the plan that you have discussed, but then they'll give you, at this point, renders. Renders are artistic impressions of how the house will look like. So at this point, they're communicating the housing style, as in how it looks. They're communicating the material finishes of the house. They're communicating the sizes of windows. They're communicating the proportions. They're communicating generally the landscaping. They're communicating generally the colors that you want in the house. Now you'll then have another meeting with the architect, and at this point now you have a chance to again go back to the plan. Does it work? Look at the overall look of the house. Does it work for you? And if it works for you, well and good. If it doesn't work, the architect can go back and make changes. So this process, depending on how big the house is, can take maybe up to a month, depending again on the schedule of the architect and what your exact needs are. And from that stage, if you're in agreement, if everybody's in agreement on what you want, the house looks exactly how you want, you can go on to the next stage. So the next stage is the final design stage. And at this point, all you have are plans, rough plans, and pretty images. So it's not something you could really build with. So at this point, the architect needs to sit down and start making final design drawings. So final design drawings are your basic drawings that can ideally communicate what the house is about. You get? What are the materials that are being used? How thick are the walls? What are the floor finishes? What are the sizes of the rooms? What is the ceiling like? What are the levels that we're working with? How high is the floor ceiling? So with this, the architect is supposed to give you roughly, let's say, a site plan that shows the arrangement of site, how your building sits on site, maybe a ground floor plan and the number of floors that you have. Then you probably give you some elevations just to show you how the building looks on all 4 sides or 5 sides if it has that, and maybe some sections just to show you how the building works in terms of the structure, in terms of the height of the building, in terms of the roof, how the roof is being supported. But again, remember, there's still another professional to come. So now you have the final drawings from your architect, and now you need to bring in the other professional that is really important for this process. And that is the engineer, the structural engineer. The structural engineer is the one in charge of making sure the house is stable structurally. So that is, they work on what the foundation is. They work out what the column needs to be, the materials, that is, what class of concrete it needs to be, and maybe what type of steel needs to be used. They are very critical when it comes to high-rise buildings. First of all, make sure that your engineer is registered by the Engineers Board of Kenya. I guess there are also ways of just finding out. Make sure that they show you their license. And once the drawings are down, now you have 2 sets of drawing. You have the engineers and you have the structural engineers drawing. The next person that you need is a quantity surveyor. A quantity surveyor is the person who ideally figures out what quantities need to go into building that house and gives them value. So ideally you have a rough estimate of what it will cost you. And again, QSs are registered by Borax, which is the same board that registers architects. So make sure that they have a Borax license. And so now you have 3 sets of drawings. You have the architects, you have the engineers, and you have a rough idea of what it will cost. So are you ready to build? Surprisingly, not yet. You need county approvals. And so we'll look at the process that goes into county approvals. At this point, we have 3 drawings. We have the architects, the engineers, and the BQ. The BQ is yours to keep, and so to give you a reference. So the next stage is the approvals. You need to go to the county and get your building approved and get your building permit. So the documents you need at this point is the engineer's drawing, the architect's drawing, and then those land documents that we were talking about. You need to prove ownership of the land. You need to prove that you've paid your land rates, And you also need to provide a mutation plan, just showing the beacons of your land, so that the county government can have a feel of what size your land is. Yeah. So the three set of drawings will go into the county system and will be reviewed. They'll review the architectural drawing to make sure that it fits with planning guidelines in terms of setbacks, in terms of ground coverage, which are other concepts we'll discuss in another video. Then the engineer's drawings are also vetted to make sure that they are up to par. And then after that, if all goes right, if there are no changes to be made, for most drawings, you'll get the approval right away. But it's a process, it's kind of a long process that takes about, let's give it 2 months on the minimum. And so once you get your approvals from the county, you go to the next process. Before you build in most counties, you need to get NEMA approvals. NEMA is the National Environmental Management Authority. And for them, they usually have a list of requirements, which most of them you already have right now. The one that you don't have is the Environmental Impact Assessment. This is a report from a registered EIA expert that vets your development on its impact on the environment. So you need to go through an approval process through NEMA. And once you get that approval, now you go to NCA. NCA is the body that is in charge of construction, which is the National Construction Authority in the country. So at this point, what they're actually trying to make sure that you do is that you use registered contractors, you use registered labor, and so NCA will look at all the documents that you have up until now, and you need to understand that this process is cumulative. So you can't apply for NEMA if you don't have the county approvals, and you can't apply for NCA approval if you don't have the county and NEMA approvals for most buildings. So all these things, you need all these documents to get up to the NCA point. When you get to NCA, now you need to work with a registered contractor. Now, and again, a whole other topic we'll talk about some other time is the types of contractors and the classes that there are of contractors. But your architect should be able to advise you at this point what class of contractor you need. And again, depending on your needs, to determine the type of contract you want to get into. So there are roughly 2 types of contracts. The first one is a full type of contract. So that is where your contractor essentially just builds the whole house and you pay them. So you don't deal with buying materials, you don't deal with paying labor. So he does everything and you pay him. And then the other type of contract is usually a custom type of contract where you can pick some functions from the contractor. For example, you can decide that you want to buy your own materials, and then you get a contractor who does that labor contract. So you just pay for the labor. So that is the other type of contract. So if everything is in order from the county approvals and then to NEMA, then to NCA, you can actually now get into site. And then again, there's so much in between of how you need to run your site, how you need to make sure your contractor runs the site. But that is something that your contractor, if you pick the right contractor, that is something that they should sort. So let's get into construction. As a client, what is your role? Your role, essentially, first of all, you need to retain the services of the architect. You need to retain the services of the engineer, and you need to retain the services of the quantity surveyor. So the architect at this point is the person who makes sure that whatever was designed, whatever your vision was, is adhered to as the construction process goes on. You need to make sure, you need your architect there to make sure that the contractor is keeping up with what was designed, and also to approve changes that may occur, because there are always changes in construction. The engineer, again, just making sure that whatever was designed is what is being built. So it's just a system of checks and balances. And then the quantity surveyor will also ensure that the costs that were had been predicted, the provisional costs that he provided, just making sure that the project doesn't run out of budget. And if changes occur, he's the person who ideally should vet and maybe value the changes that have occurred, so it's just a set of checks and balances. Everybody is there to just make sure that the client gets exactly what you need. And if you're a client who's maybe taken up the full contract, you need someone on site to represent your interest, and this is usually the clerk of works. Again, in another video, we'll talk about the people who work in a construction site, but the clerk of works is important for the client because ideally they represent the interest of the client, especially when it comes to quality control in construction. The architect is also always there to make sure that the building goes right. But roughly, that's the process that you go through when you're constructing. Once you go through the construction process, it gets to a point where you have the structure done. And at this point, you might need to bring in other professionals. You might need to bring in an interior designer. You may need to also bring in a landscaper. At this point, you also need to realize that we haven't discussed a lot of other professionals that come in the construction process, but that's something we'll talk about some other time. So at this point, you bring in the interior designer to work on your interiors, and your landscaper who will advise you on the types of grasses to plant, on the trees that you need, and the type of planning you need to do in your outdoor spaces. And so ideally, those are the professionals you need, but I need you to realize that we haven't gone in depth into what it takes to build a house, from design up to handover. So we haven't gone into detail in the approval process. There's so much that goes into it. I'll at some point in some later videos, I'll show you how to read architectural drawings, how to read structural drawings, again, how to read a bill of quantities. I'll tell you about other professionals that we didn't consider, that we assumed came with the contractor. That is your electricals guy, your plumbing guy, and all these are things we discuss in depth at some other point. With that, thank you for tuning in, and subscribe. If you've stuck up to this point, first of all, thank you, and I do not take it for granted. And I want to make this channel a point where education and knowledge is shared freely, so that some of these processes don't seem so daunting to you when you're first of all trying to do them. So if there's a process within there that you need more clarification on, just kindly comment, and I'll get into detail. I'll bring the professionals on board, and we can have engineers speak, we can have quantity surveyors speak, we can have electricians speak, we can bring in contractors, we can bring in the people from NEMA, and they'll tell us exactly what is needed. With that, as I sign off, kindly share this content, subscribe to my various accounts on TikTok, on Instagram, and mostly on YouTube. So thank you, and have a nice day.